everyone. So, as we head into the end of the year, we are already deep into holiday season, which means time with friends and family, lots of fun celebrations, and also some indulgent meals here and there. At this time of year, especially with the dreariness of winter weather combined with holiday celebrations, a lot of you might be thinking about what you're eating and how you feel about your body more so than you do in other seasons of the year. That is completely normal, especially following Christmas, going into New Year's. You kind of want to feel this renewed sense of purpose, of confidence, of strength. So, long story short, it is a time when a lot of us are thinking about dieting. So, today I wanted to cover that topic in advance of when you might feel motivated to do it because I have a lot of feelings about typical dieting information and nutrition information in general that is out there for the general public. I have a lot of empathy for how hard it is to just navigate that mountain of information. And I want to say that 99% of it is completely unnecessary. So I just wanted to give my opinion as a nutritionist, as a health coach, and in my experience working with people on just two basic things you need to know and stick with, and all the rest you can throw away. And I really want to explain why that is. But before I get into that, I just want to tell you what motivated me to think about this in the first place. And it was a conversation I had with another sports dietitian at a networking event a couple days ago. So, as some of you might know, I am training to work in either collegiate or professional sports as a registered dietitian. And as a part of that, I go to these networking events to meet other people in the field from time to time. And I was lucky this week to meet a guy, let's call him Tyler. I think that was his name, but it might have been something slightly different. Doesn't matter for the purposes of this story. But I met a guy named Tyler who used to be a high school and college wrestler. So it was very interesting talking to him because he had been in a weight class sport where it was important for him to control his body weight. And if you know anything about wrestling, they do it in a very extreme way where you cut down to a weight class before competition so you can have the biggest advantage. So throughout the year, whenever he needed to go to a wrestling meet, he would need to get down to a weight that was lower than what his natural set point is or what his body is comfortable being at. And while I don't have that experience, I had a very similar experience when I was first getting into nutrition because the first coach I ever hired was a bodybuilding coach. And bodybuilding is very, very similar in that it relies on very strict rules and strict, rigid diets to control weight down to a certain point that is lower than what your body typically likes to sit at naturally. And the thing about either of those approaches is that they're super, super effective because weight is pretty much down to a science of calories in versus calories out. And once you add the macro component, getting enough protein to preserve lean mass can help you refine your body composition even more. But basically, what I wanted to say is both of us had this experience leading into nutrition, and what helped us get into nutrition was knowing a lot of very specific rules to follow to completely control the environment and reach our goals. And now that we're maybe 5 to 10 years removed from those experiences, both of our stances on that are very similar. And it's that the majority of people don't need this at all. And it can actually do more harm than good when implemented in the long term because you kind of get entrenched in these beliefs that nutrition requires a certain amount of like discipline and adherence to specific rules in order to achieve what you want, which it really doesn't. Now that I am older and more mature, I know that it's a lot more flexible than that, and flexibility is actually more sustainable and realistic. But that's essentially the premise of what I want to talk about today, and not only how this affects elite athletes and people who are really into performance based or weight based sports, but also just how it applies to everyone because we are all subject to the same messages about how our bodies should look, how our bodies should work, what we should do to be healthy, aspiring to this standard of health that's set in front of us. So I think this is applicable to you regardless of whether you are an office worker who's just sort of like dabbles in exercise from time to time, or you are a collegiate or professional athlete. I think the same rules generally apply, just to different degrees. So I want to take a step back and talk about why at least I think the dieting and weight loss industry is as big and as successful as it is, given that it shows such dismal long-term results. um, I think every year there are millions of people who buy into nutrition, weight loss, dieting products in in an attempt or aspiring to change their body in some type of way, which I'm in no way shaming. I'm not anti-diet at all. I would actually be very much for it if these products and services and programs actually gave them what they needed. But the catch is that they actually do, just not in the way that you might expect. If you have ever been on a structured diet of any type, it probably worked. It probably worked really well for a short amount of time. And that's what all of these programs have in common, regardless of whether you're talking keto or carnivore diet or veganism or like calorie counting. There's all these different versions of rules and systems that are available to apply to nutrition, and they all work. They all work for the same reason, which is why it is very, very easy for them to catch on because people get addicted to that success they get, and then they attribute their success to a very specific diet. The most extreme example of this I've seen is a former client I had when I was just getting started with coaching about 4 years ago. She was one of the members at the CrossFit gym that I coached at for a short period of time, and she came to me for some nutrition advice. And this woman was wonderful. She was bubbly, resilient, and worked her ass off. Like she could do anything. And the only pitfall for her in nutrition was the pitfall was kind of her discipline, her ruthless discipline when it came to accomplishing her goals. I want to explain why that is. So, she was following a very strict fad diet. I forget the name of what it was called, but essentially it was one of those diets that prescribes from the beginning of the day until the end of the day exactly what you should eat in what amounts for each meal. And it was very restrictive and very specific. So, for example, I remember every single morning it was two hard boiled eggs and a black coffee. And that sounds just as horrible as it is. It's like very low calories, high in protein, but not much else, and caffeine. So every single day it would be like a coffee and two eggs. And then for lunch, it would be something like a salad with iceberg lettuce and X amount of ham and bell peppers, or I'm just making this up, but it would give you a very specific food and you would eat that for lunch and you would eat that every single day. Same for dinner. She would follow this diet for, I think it was maybe a month or two that the diet was prescribed for. Like it was a constrained amount of time that you were supposed to be on it. And then every time she would go on this diet, she would lose like 20 pounds. It was very reliable. Every time she would go on it, it would be such an extreme caloric restriction that her body weight would reliably go down like 20 pounds. But then you can probably guess how this story ends after she gets off the diet and returns to a normal way of eating, eating what she wants to eat. She would gain those 20 pounds back and then some. So, over the course of the last, I don't know, like 3, 4, 5 years, she would be on and off and on and off and on and off of this diet. And as she was yo yoing, her weight was slowly increasing and increasing and increasing with every single time that she went through that diet, despite all the willpower and discipline and suffering it takes to eat the same meal every single day for 2 months. It was actually on net causing her to gain weight. And she was really, really struggling with this. And at the time she saw me, she was also very burned out of that diet. Like she just did not have the motivation anymore to start it because she was getting sick of those foods naturally. So, yeah, this is a prime example of the type and mode of thinking that specific types of diets pull people into because it works one time and it works in such a way that it feels so life changing. Like those 20 pounds made such a big difference in how she looked, how she presented herself, the compliments she was getting from people. Like it was addictive. She wanted to be at a smaller size, and that was her way of doing it. That was a way that she knew that she could pull out of her back pocket every time she wanted to lose that amount of weight, and it worked. So she felt very loyal to that diet because it was the first one that she tried that worked that well. The catch is many people, I would be willing to bet hundreds and thousands of people, if not more, feel the same way about a diet, and they're all different diets. That's why you get the fanatics online on social media, like the Liver King sharing how he eats a bunch of meat and he looks ripped. And then people start following that and they think it works because it does work for a while. But the real secret is there is no secret to any of these diets. There is no silver bullets. None of these are going to be the end all be all of how you can eat to achieve a certain body composition and body weight. There are going to be many ways to get there. Some are going to work better for some individuals than others, but virtually any way that sells, any way that is marketed to you, is almost a step too far, and it's a step too far in the direction of the specificity needed to get to that goal. For me, I had a similar experience to this as well before I even had the nutrition coach. Long before I even tried to get into nutrition myself, I started doing CrossFit in 2014. And as soon as I joined my CrossFit gym, maybe 3 months in, my gym was having some sort of New Year's nutrition challenge where, for the first time in my life as a 22-year-old, I stepped onto one of those in-body machines that measures your body fat and your body weight. And I was challenged over the course of this month to get my body fat and my body weight numbers down so I can win this competition. And the way I was supposed to do it at the time, the diet that was in vogue in the CrossFit community was paleo. So I went from my whole life eating whatever I wanted, not doing any structured dieting at all, to paleo, which is not the worst diet, but it is also quite strict. It's kind of like a whole foods only diet, and then that itself is limited to only certain foods, like no dairy, no legumes, no added sugar, but meat, vegetables, fruit, and nuts were okay. So I was basically just eating meat, veggies, fruit, and nuts every day, all day. Never had to count a calorie. I actually did not, I believe I did not lose that much weight, but my body fat percentage went down significantly. And after this month, I felt such a huge difference in how I performed. Like I was able to run long distances without getting tired. I was able to lift more weights. I felt like superhuman. And so I credited all of this to paleo. I thought, okay, well now I know the secret to how I should eat so I can feel the way that I need to feel. But after the nutrition challenge ended, I still had my social life that I had put on pause for the whole month of January. I still had friends asking me to go out to restaurants, to go drink alcohol, which I hadn't done for a whole month, so I wanted to participate in that again. So as soon as I started kind of sliding into a normal lifestyle that was open to these different experiences again, I started breaking the rules of paleo one by one until I no longer abided by it, and my body went back to the way it was before then. So, very similar experience. Similar short term results, similar lack of long term sustainability. But I came away from that feeling like, okay, nutrition is important. And I came away from that feeling like good nutrition is very, very difficult to achieve because the only success I'd had with it was a strict dieting protocol. What does this all mean? In general, I would say that diets fall under two categories. They either restrict the amount of food you can eat, or they restrict the types of food you can eat. And the amount of food, this could be something like calorie counting, macro tracking. This goes most straightforwardly into the thermodynamics of weight loss. Basically, if you eat less, you burn more, you lose weight. Makes a lot of sense. Things like intermittent fasting also fit under this category because even though it doesn't explicitly limit the amount of food you eat, it limits the time window to which you can eat to the point where it's just not comfortable to fit in that much food within 8 hours, as it would be over 16 hours. Limiting the types of food you can eat. This is usually done very intentionally. The foods that are limited are typically foods that are higher in calories and lower in basically like the fullness factor. So, not eating things that are really high in fat and sugar, but low in things like protein and fiber. That way, you might believe that, okay, by eliminating, for instance, by eliminating added sugar and processed foods, like that's the secret to losing weight. But really, it's by eliminating those foods, the only options you have are foods that are kind of really dense and difficult to get down, but higher in, lower in calories, but higher in volume. Then the only options of foods you have are lower calories. So that indirectly affects the energy you're taking in too. So it also fits under this primary umbrella, which I'm going to describe all diets as, which is caloric restriction. So no matter which one of the hundreds of diets you choose out there, all of them have the same underlying way of working, which is that they're applying this arbitrary structure so that you will eat less. Not less in terms of volume, but less in terms of calories. And that is how weight loss happens. The thing is, for many people, applying any structure is going to achieve the same result. Going from just eating whatever you want, whatever you feel like, to eating something within some boundaries is most likely going to result in you taking in less calories than you normally would, and that's why it works. And this is actually on principle, a good thing. Because if you think about our food environment these days, if you are just living in the world and choosing from what's available to you and not thinking about nutrition at all, there are just so many options out there. I mean, we live in America, the land of abundance, the land of food scientists creating addictive products for you to try and overeat. We have a ton of foods that are high in fats and sugars and have gone through other processing steps so that you can put down a high amount of calories, higher than what you need, without feeling satisfied. And those foods are the most palatable foods, things like chips and ice cream and cookies and french fries. Those are things that are abundantly available in our food environment. And if you didn't think about nutrition at all, they would be the tastiest foods. So, with no doubt, is it actually productive to have some rules around what you eat? The question is, which rules, right? Because we've seen different trends, like we've seen low fat, we've seen low carb, we've seen intermittent fasting, we've seen paleo, carnivore, we've seen vegan. There's so many different flavors of diets that all restrict different factors of the diet. And none of them are completely right. None of them were designed for you. They were just designed to be a memorable rule that if someone could stick with, it would result in them eating less calories. But how long they could stick with it, how happy they are sticking with it, That's a different question. I wouldn't have any better insights or answers to this whole conundrum if I hadn't had the fortune of starting my nutrition career in a city as diverse as New York City. Because by default, every single client who walked in my door had a very different cultural, ethnic, professional background. Um, I got so many different glimpses of so many people's different lifestyles and eating habits and preferences, basically, people from all over the world, that in a short amount of time, I was able to kind of see the themes. Well, see and appreciate the differences, of course, but then see the themes of what everyone kind of had in common and what worked for all of these different people. Some had religious dietary restrictions. Others came from countries where meals were served at different times of day than what's customary in America. Some people just didn't like certain food groups, so we avoided them altogether. But with each and every one, by applying really fundamental nutrition, but applying it in a way that could be adapted to them, worked. And to boil it down, I think there are two rules. I wouldn't even call them rules, really. They're two main guidelines that I now approach with every single case I get because they work so, so reliably. Two guidelines that I can give anyone, from a 55-year-old man who eats a standard American diet with no vegetables, and I can give to a 19-year-old NCAA Division I college athlete, and they would both be able to benefit from it and both be able to achieve a generally healthier, fitter state. And those rules, I'll just give them to you now, are number one, aim for 80% whole foods in your diet. And two, try in as many meals as possible to include a protein, a carb, and a color. So, real quick, let me just deep dive into each of those. 80% whole foods. Now, why isn't this 100%? And what even is a whole food? Let's start there. So, by whole food, I'm very flexible on that definition. I know that many foods go through different levels of processing. But as long as you can recognize the ingredients in a food or a food product, I consider it whole. So something that kind of just came right off a tree, like an apple, is a whole food. Something that came out of a stream, like a fish, like a fillet of salmon, that's a whole food. And something that is made from whole ingredients that you all recognize, like a natural peanut butter that's just ground up peanuts, also a whole food. Even things like pea protein powder, it's just basically dried up peas ground up, or like whey protein, it's just a part of milk that has been distilled, but nothing's been added to it. So I would think that those all count, even though they're technically processed. I basically just mean foods that the ingredients derive from natural things that you've seen before. The reason why I say that 80% whole foods is a good rule to have is because these products, whole foods, they contain a good balance of components, let's say. Anything that Mother Nature made is something that we are supposed to live off of, that we're supposed to subsist off of. It hasn't been tainted by manufacturing and corporations to make it unnatural, to make us unnaturally gain weight by eating too much of it. So these foods designed by Mother Nature, they combine all these different components that our bodies are naturally good at breaking down and processing and absorbing together, and also contain the ingredients we need to feel full at the right time. Something I just told a client today is if you're eating the right composition of foods, you should feel the physical fullness of your stomach being full around the same time as your brain starts to feel satisfied. Because fullness is kind of bimodal. There's like stomach fullness of being physically full, and then there's mental fullness, right? The feeling that I've had enough, I'm satisfied, I'm happy. If you're eating the right types of food and mostly whole foods, those should happen at approximately the same time. You feel like you're physically full and mentally satisfied. If you're eating more highly ultra processed foods, like if you're just sitting in front of the TV eating a bag of potato chips, like your stomach's going to get full at a certain time, but your brain is going to keep craving more and more and more until your stomach makes you like physically sick because there's no end to it. There's no satiety signal that gets sent up to your brain. So in short, yes, whole foods better because it's just what we know how to process. Our bodies we're born to process that through millions of years of evolution. They have the right composition of macronutrients, which is protein, fat, carbs, and then fiber. And they also have these phytochemicals if it's coming from a plant that's really good for our gut. So it has all the ingredients we need in the right proportions. It was designed that way by nature. The reason I say 80% and not 100% is to be realistic. um, yes, by a pure health perspective, if you were able to eat 100% whole foods and nothing else, you would be in a good state of health. That is how our ancestors survived. But you are not our ancestors. You live in a society and an environment where there are lots of fun manufactured processed foods laying around. And the mental energy it takes to say no to those every single time they show up is just not worth the effort. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. It is exactly the 80-20 rule. You will get the majority of the benefit, vast majority of the benefit of whole foods if you just make it like 80% of the way. The difference between eating 80% whole foods and 90% whole foods, not that big. Difference between eating 90% and 100%, tiny, insignificant. If you throw in a chocolate chip cookie from now and again, if you have dessert after a meal every now and then, it's definitely not the end of the world. The problem is just when we start overloading those foods. So 80%, good rule of thumb, you get the vast majority of the benefits. 20%, allow yourself some wiggle room to actually live and enjoy life. Second rule. Second rule is each meal having 3 components: protein, carbs, and color. By color, I mean something naturally grown, again, whole food, that has color. Basically a fruit or a vegetable, something that adds some color to your plate. There's a reason for each of these 3 things. And the reasoning is more in depth if you want to get into the science of it all. But the basic premise is that your body primarily needs protein for muscle repair, and for feeling full. It needs carbs because it's our major source of energy. And it needs fruits and vegetables for vitamins and minerals. Everyone tells you that vitamins are important. They don't tell you why. That's because there's over 20 different vitamins and they all serve different functions in your body. But the main thing you have to know is that vitamins and minerals, they are like the little molecular helpers that help things happen in your body. So any chemical reaction that happens, whether you need to breathe, like inhale oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide, or you need to create energy, or you need to digest things, or you need brain power, you need to fire some neurons, like all of those require these chemical reactions to happen at the right time, and the vitamins and minerals basically just help that happen through signaling and enzymes and things like that. Um, that's the basics. It's just if you don't have enough fruits and veggies, things will happen a lot slower and less efficient, and you will feel sluggish. The main thing you'll feel is lower energy. So those are kind of the high level reasons for each of those three. Can definitely get into more in a later video. But protein, carbs, and color, if you're thinking about how to build what's called a balanced meal, I would just think about having each of those on your plate in about equal proportions. I say about because every meal is different. Sometimes you're having like a stew or a burrito or something where you can't really control the exact proportions of everything. So don't worry about it. The most important thing is that they're all there. The optimization above that is all there in roughly equal amounts. So if you're able to have about a third of your plate protein, a third of your plate carb, and a third of your plate fruit and vegetable, that's a pretty good ratio for most people. If you are someone who is working a more physically demanding job, or if you're someone who is working out, basically exercising at a more vigorous rate or doing more activity, then the only change is that more of that plate should be the carb. And the carb being something like rice or bread or potatoes, not substituting fruit for that carb. So, yeah, those two rules: 80% whole foods, protein, carbs, veggies, and fruit. Those are the basics, I would say, to every single nutrition plan. And the surprising thing is that most people are not able to nail those two things consistently. It is very, very difficult to get to that point. Even the athletes I've counseled who are D1 athletes in college who have basically built a career off of performing in sport, they don't hit all of those things consistently and need a lot of counseling to get there. So, if you personally are pretty far off from those two benchmarks, don't fret. The best way to achieve it is just to kind of inch slowly towards it. Like maybe if you don't achieve 80% whole foods in your diet, you can get to 50%. Every little inch of gain is important. If you're not getting any vegetables, maybe just try to eat a vegetable once a week rather than have it at every single meal. Nutrition is not about perfection. It's about making changes that we can sustain. And the thing about human behavior is we hate making these extreme overnight changes. Sometimes we get a burst of inspiration on New Year's Day and we're like, okay, all of a sudden I'm going to start exercising twice as much as I usually do, and I'm only going to eat whole foods for an entire month. But we all know how long that lasts because it takes so much effort to maintain a change that big. But if you just inch towards it slowly, making really small changes one by one until they stick, the idea is that your diet can change 1% at a time, change so slowly that you don't even really notice that it's changing until it just becomes automatic habit for you to eat in a healthier way. But again, I think it is absolutely worth the effort. I'm not saying that diets are nonsense and we should throw them out the window. We should definitely care about our nutrition. But I think we just need to be smarter about whose directions we follow and kind of to what extent and degree we follow them. For me, this is just my experience, my two guidelines. But yeah, there's room for flexibility in everything. That's why I say guidelines and not harsh rules. Just to close out, I want to give an update on that client I mentioned at the beginning who was following that fad diet with coffee and hard boiled eggs. So she ended up working with me for about a year when we were in New York together. And we started making very small changes to her diet. And just as I said before, she's also Asian American, so was used to eating foods like stir fries with white rice, eating kind of like braised fish, boiled vegetables with sauce, and all different types of soups for the winter. So the first thing I told her was that she doesn't even have to change any of these ethnic foods that were core to her diet. Previously, because she lived in America, she thought, okay, the nutrition advice I'm getting, it's telling me that I need to swap my white rice to brown rice. It's telling me that I need to eat more salads. I need to eat like quinoa and kale and grain bowls and that's just not familiar to her. It was a big change from her diet to follow, like, a standard American nutrition plan. So I told her, "No, you don't need to change anything. Your food has everything you need. You're getting protein from fish, you're getting a wide variety of Chinese vegetables, you're eating white rice, which is perfectly fine as a carb. So you don't need to change any of that." What we changed instead was just her frequency of eating certain things and the proportion and amounts that she would eat. So slowly we started giving her estimates of portion sizes, trying to beef up some of her meals with slightly more protein, and trying to get her to eat at a consistent time 3 times a day, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner, rather than what she was doing before, which was eating very little towards the front end of the day and then eating a lot at dinner, where then she would be more likely to be really hungry and go overboard with dinner. Um, Basically, we followed the principles that I said. Because she she started eating these 3 consistent meals, she started eating less snacks, which tended to be more processed snack foods, like convenience foods throughout the day, so her proportion of whole foods that she was eating increased because she was eating more main meals that she was preparing at home. And because we incorporated those rules of proportions of protein and carbs and veggies, she started expanding the protein portion on her plates, maybe making the carb portion a little bit less to match her energy needs better. And just through those two changes, she was able to lose over 30 pounds, which is more than she ever lost on that fad diet. Yes, it took a long time. It probably took over 6 months, whereas that diet was 2 months. But today she is still in her slimmer body and she is running marathons, whereas before she could hardly make it a mile. And at the beginning, I wanna be honest with you, this client was not that happy because I wasn't challenging she felt like I wasn't challenging her enough, and this is true of a lot of the people I work with. They're very hard workers. They are used to trying to push themselves to the limit, optimize everything up front, do 110%, and I love that motivation. I love that ambitious effort. But as a coach, I kind of more often have to restrain people from their initial urge to do that because, like I said, I know how that story ends. You try to do too much right off the bat, you can sustain it for a few weeks, for a few months, maybe, but after that, it's just not realistic for you to follow a pattern that is that strict for the rest of your life, given everything else that's going to come up in life that you have to tolerate. So, with her, a lot of it was just kind of urging her to be patient with the process, like urging her to trust the process, knowing these are changes that are much smaller, that are 10 times smaller than what she's used to doing, but just encouraging her to stick with it and see what happens. If it doesn't work, we'll ramp it up. But we never had to ramp anything up. She basically ate mostly the same foods that she loved eating, just in slightly different proportions, slightly different quantities, and she's thriving now. The goal of every coach is to make a client never need a nutrition coach again. The goal is to make your services obsolete to people you've worked with. And with her, I'm really, really proud that she was able to come so far that she'll probably never need nutrition advice again. I hope she'll never need another diet again, and she'll continue eating the foods that she's ate her whole life that she loves eating, and it will be in the right way to fuel her performance and her goals. So with that, I just want to close out. Don't trust everything you read online. Don't do extreme diets. Take it slow, stick with the basics, master the basics, and you've got this.